myself, Laura Perna, Marissa Addison, Chelsea Murray, Pooja Patel, and Nathan Jang. So if we were together in a room, we would probably be greeting each other. Some of us would be hugging each other. And since we're all here virtually, I want to say that we're making a virtual link circle, just as these children and University of Maryland students are in the picture above. We're here today to think hard about what we need to do and also to hope strongly to seek a more equitable, resilient, and ecologically sustainable higher education system. One sort of advantage to the COVID-19 is that we're able to participate more widely from the East, the West, the North, and the South. So I'd like to just begin by saying cheers and a warm welcome to all of you. Can everyone hear me well? I assume so. So I'll just continue. We've all been reading in the newspaper that adjustments are not enough, that we really can't return to normal. Award-winning author Arundhati Roy said it like this. She says, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It's a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. Mayor Eric Garcetti also said this. He's the chair of the C40 cities. He said, COVID-19 has laid bare the systemic inequities too often found at the heart of our communities. And as we start to emerge from this crisis, we must rebuild an economy that truly works for everyone. And I guess thinking about higher education, it's really the same thing. We have to find a way to rebuild a higher education system that truly works for everyone. As I begin, I'd like to make some acknowledgements. This report series is dedicated to Arnold Mitchum and Tom Mortensen, both of whom I saw are on this call. And without they're very different, but Arnold Mitchum had this idea for this indicators report, and he worked on it for a long time. Tom Mortensen, of course, has compiled and analyzed much of the data that we include in the indicators report. So I also want to say special thanks for Lumina and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Without their support, we would not be able to do this report. And I'd also like to do a shout out to the government contractors and academic research teams that have labored for so many years to make sure that this data that we're using is comparable as much as possible over time. Hello? Okay, I'd also like to thank the COE and the University of Pennsylvania for the backbone support these organizations provide to the project, and give a special thanks to the COE board for their support. So the theme of this webinar, or this shared dialogues, is Recover, Reimagine, Rebuild. And our agenda today is I'm going to do an overview of some of the highlights of the report, and then I'm going to turn it over to Laura, who's going to give some reflections. And then we're fortunate that we have a TRIO student, Veronica Mixon, who's going to share some of her reflections on what it's like to be a student in the time of COVID-19. And then we're going to break into shared solutions dialogues. We have 11 groups. It's a large number of persons on this call. And then we'll have about 25, 30 minutes for the shared solutions dialogues. Then we'll have a report out of 3 groups. And then we'll have a wrap-up reflections from representatives of the Lumina and the Gates Foundation. So we have sort of Uncle Sam's Thanksgiving table. This is a picture from Harper's Weekly in 1869. During the time of the fight for more universal suffrage. We have 11 groups, and I like to think of us as one group, but then we'll be dividing into these subgroups based upon different types of institutions: flagship, land grant, rural, urban, regional, state, minority serving, state opportunity programs, community colleges, And then we have one that's sort of the overflow group called Combined Group. Just a background about the Indicators Project. We started this project in 2015. We published the first report, and we had 3 purposes, and those remain our 3 purposes. The first one is to compile a report that would track our progress on equity issues in higher education. And the second is to do the shared solutions dialogue, which we'll be doing in a few moments. And then the third is to support equity actions that come out of our dialogues about policies and practices that will hinder progress towards equity and those as we move forward. The key questions that we're going to be talking about today, and you'll see in your dialogue protocol, are first, in what ways has the movement towards mass virtual education that has resulted from the COVID-19 crisis provided insight into the potential to expand equity or exacerbate inequality in post-secondary education? And second, what steps at the federal, state, and institutional level should we be taking in order to ensure that we emerge from the COVID crisis with a more equitable system of higher education? There are some specific policies that we put into the shared dialogue, and you may have others that you want to talk about during this time. The ones that we included were federal-state partnerships to ensure debt-free college for all, supporting Pell Grant restoration, increasing the reach and resources for college access and support programs. I've transitioned from a competitive merit-based dominated admission system to a more inclusive mastery requirements, and then addressing the systemic inequalities that disproportionately limit options for low-income and first-generation individuals and communities of color. And then we encourage you in the shared dialogues, if you have other proposals and suggestions, to include them. We will be providing a Google Sheet for each group to put the highlights of their recording from their groups. So I'm going to just go through really pretty quickly some highlights from the report. We organized it according to 6 questions. Who enrolls in post-secondary education? What types of institutions do students attend? Does financial aid eliminate financial barriers? How do students pay for college? Does bachelor's degree attainment vary by family characteristics? And how do attainment rates in the US compare with other nations? We know that we have a situation in which many of us have observed, and people who are writing about this have observed, that we have had a steady growth in inequality in the US. Currently, by 2018, the lowest quintile of household income had to provide for themselves on 3% of the household income. We also know that there's been a decline of upward mobility. One way of measuring this is the percent of children who at age 30 have a higher inflation-adjusted income than their parents had at age 30. And we also see declines in this as well. One of the persistent systemic inequalities that we have is that based on race ethnicity. And we see that this chart includes one of the statistics. Are you still hearing me? Can everybody mute themselves?
Yeah, I can hear you, Margaret.
Okay.
Maggie.
Okay, good. Okay, that the percent with negative wealth among the Black community and the Latino community is very high. For example, in 2016, 37% of Black families had negative wealth. We know from the data in our indicators report that more students are enrolling in college, and about over 80% of high school students state that they aspire to get a bachelor's degree. And in this statistic, we see that 51% of students in the low income have enrolled in higher education. But when we look at where the students enroll and their persistence, we see great differences. We see that this, for example, is just This is from the high school longitudinal study, and we see that the chance of a student going to a most or highly selective college was 8 times higher in the highest quintile as the lowest quintile, with 33% of students in the highest quintile going to a most or highly selective school versus 4% in the lowest quintile. One of the other things that we've observed in doing the indicators report is that we have a widening gap among our US states in attainment, and this has many consequences. And you can see this is census data from 1940 to 2018, and you see this divergence of the states in terms of educational attainment. One of the things that we did this year in the indicators report that we did not do previously is we disaggregated the data by whether the student was an independent student or a dependent student. And we know that 50% of undergraduates are independent. And this statistic has not actually changed very much since about the 1990s. But we also know from, and we have some statistics in the indicators report this year, that the independent students are most risk of not graduating. We know that over 80% of them are part-time, almost 50% of them work more than 35 hours a week. And so this is a group that, especially we know with the COVID-19 employment issues, this is a group that we feel that we need to pay a special attention to when we think about what we can do as we recover and rebuild. This is data that we put in the report each year. We know that Pell Grants have not kept up with costs. In constant 2018 dollars, the average cost weighted by enrollment was $24,000, whereas the maximum Pell was $6,000 and the average Pell was just over $4,000. So this means that Pell Grants cover only about 25% of costs in the current times. In the 1970s, they did reach about 2/3 of costs, but this has precipitously declined. In order for Pell Grants to cover about the same amount of costs that were covered in the 1970s, they would need to be at a maximum of $16,000 rather than the $6,000 that we have today. We also know that this is a period of state funding declines that we've witnessed. This chart gives the fiscal support for higher education per $1,000 of personal income at the state level, and we see that this is also declining. And if we look at this data over time, we see that states have many competing priorities, and we see that education in general and higher education as well has not grown. And if we look at this, we know that healthcare has been growing a lot in terms of state appropriations or state, and we know that this is probably going to be something which grows even more given the COVID-19 public health crisis. So this creates a situation where we have extreme unmet need for the students in the US. This chart gives the unmet need is the need that exists after all the grants and discounts are taken into account for students. And so we see for dependent students, it was about $10,000 per year. For independent students, it's about over $16,000. So we have the student debt crisis, and one of the, this is a problem for all students, but especially for minority students. We know that this is data on graduating bachelor's degree completers, and we know that 70% of them graduate with debt. And for example, this is among Black graduates, it's 85%. And not only that, the amount of grant of debt is on average in 2018 dollars was $36,000, more than $36,000. We're probably all seen the statistics that we now have $1.56 trillion in student loan debt. We have 45 million students who have debt. So when we look at the 6-year completions rate, in many ways, I'm sad to say this is not surprising when you think about the statistics that I just went over. This chart gives 6-year completions. And for low income and first generation students, it's about 21% graduate with a bachelor's degree after 6 years, compared to 66% of those who have neither low income or first generation. And we know that our students in high school, they aspire to get a bachelor's degree. Over 80% of them want to get a bachelor's degree, but this completion rate indicates just how many barriers there are for students to complete. When we look at the US data, this is the OECD data, and we noticed that the US, which was about second in bachelor's degree attainment for 25 to 34-year-olds, is now 18th. And the interesting thing about this is that most of the countries that are now up above the US were not in that situation in 2000, but they have had policies and support that has provided enough of a boost to their rates. The US has also increased. It was about 30% in 2000. It's now about 39%, which is just about at the OECD average. When we look at the differences by US states, we see, as I mentioned before, this widening of differences. In 2018, Massachusetts would have ranked second in the OECD with 53%. But when we look at the other states, we see that there's a large range. But when we look at these countries that have really increased, many of them are at about the level that our lowest states were in 2000, but they have managed to move forward on this a lot. So I wanted to just share with you, we have posted the 2020 indicators report at the Pell website. It's a repository, has all of our past and future reports. We have provided Excel data for each of the charts, and as well as posting the essays and the dialogue questions. And coming soon, we are going to have interactive dynamic charts that we're going to be releasing over the next year. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Laura Perna, who has been our wonderful partner and has really helped us with the indicators report technically and in so many ways over this period. Laura is the Centennial Presidential Professor of Education at the University of Pennsylvania. She's also the chair of the Higher Education Division, and she's the executive director of Penn Ahead. And as of July, she will be the vice provost for faculty at the University of Pennsylvania. So Laura. So Laura is going to unmute herself soon.
Just waiting on the host.
Great.
Okay,
I see
can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
very
great.
well.
Wonderful. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today. The high-level takeaway from this year's indicators report is clear. We have deep and profound inequity in our nation's higher education systems. I want to underscore the data in this report describe the status of equity prior to the pandemic. This reality underscores the importance of our considering not only what these data show, but what also can we do to help reduce the exacerbation of inequity in higher education, and perhaps, thinking more hopefully even, are there improvements in equity that we can be making? To set the stage for the shared dialogue session, I'd like us to think about two issues: time and the roles and responsibilities of different actors. So on this next slide, I've laid out how I've been thinking about our current time. And really there are three different errors. So clearly a lot has been happening over the past several weeks. I'd like us to think about what lessons have we learned as colleges and universities have moved to remote delivery of higher education. What has worked with regard to teaching and learning? What have we learned about the financial, the academic, emotional, and other supports that different students need? And what have we learned about how to address these needs? Second, the big question of today is clearly what is going to happen in this next academic year and with what consequences? Each day, the news has information about the decisions that institutions are making with regard to the delivery of instruction, at least for the fall. We'll likely continue to see variations in the specifics. What is clear, fall 2020 will be different than prior falls. We as a community of folks who care deeply about equity in higher education need to be thinking about what are the issues we have to be raising now with the goal of creating equity-oriented policy and practice in this coming academic year. Third, I hope we can also be looking forward. What is our vision for higher education beyond the academic year, this next academic year? We need to be considering and helping others to understand that there could be important long-term consequences for equity in higher education of the actions that we are taking now. I hope we can be thinking about implications for equity of different approaches to teaching and learning. What are the academic, financial, technological, and other supports that different students need to succeed in a remote learning environment? And how do we ensure access, affordability, and opportunity to high quality higher education for all people in this new world, while also recognizing health and safety needs? In this next slide, I also hope we can think about the roles and responsibilities of different actors. This slide shows a conceptual model that resulted from a study of the relationship between state policy and higher education in 5 states. The book from this project was co-authored with Joni Finney and Jamie Rorison, then a Penn student, but now our important colleague at the Gates Foundation, was an important contributor to this work. This model summarizes what we concluded matters to a state's overall higher education attainment and to equity in higher education attainment. The smaller circles represent 3 categories of public policies that are needed to promote equity in higher education. For each of these categories, there are important questions for us to consider in this current time. The first pertains to the use of fiscal resources. Whether college is affordable depends on federal, state, and institutional policies and practices, and how those come together for particular students in particular places. Proposals for federal-state partnerships to ensure debt-free college reflect the potential value of aligning federal and state policy levers with the goal of promoting college affordability. But we need to be thinking through the nuances of those as well. Also important is how to ensure continued availability of federal, state, institutionally funded grant aid that's targeted to address the financial need of low-income students. The second category of policies here pertains to those that help students move across educational sectors and institutions without loss of credit. The pandemic has had important implications not only for higher ed, but also K-12 education. Given the likelihood that K-12 education will also be changed into the future, what do we need to be doing to ensure that all students who enroll in college have the support they need to complete? It also seems likely that enrollment will increase at many community colleges in the fall. What can state policymakers and institutional leaders do to help more students who enter community college transfer to a 4-year institution without loss of credit? And how can we ensure that community colleges have the fiscal and other resources they need to support and educate students? The third category pertains to the availability of high-quality higher education. This spring, institutions made quick transitions to deliver remote instruction. Moving forward, what needs to be done to ensure that all people have the opportunity to participate in higher education? What are the technology and bandwidth issues that have to be addressed, for example? I also wonder, especially in the context of high unemployment, what changes are needed to better enable and support adult learners get the education and training they need for the workforce re-entry. And this is related to our inclusion of data about independent students in the report this year. Many more questions we can raise now. I look forward to continued discussion of these issues in the shared dialogue discussions. But first, it's my honor to introduce our next speaker, Veronica Mixon. Veronica is a senior at the University of Alabama, Birmingham. She's a dual degree student majoring in psychology and Africana studies, and she has a concentration in global health studies. She's also participating in the McNair Post-Baccalaureate Achievement Program. Thanks so much for being here with us today, Veronica. We look forward to your comments.
Good afternoon, everyone. As she stated, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Veronica Mixon, and I would like to thank my McNair advisor, Dr. Kareem Russell, the Pell Institute, and the Council of Opportunity and Education for providing me with this platform to communicate my experiences about how COVID-19 has impacted my college journey. Enrolling in college was a scary proposition for me. I knew I was smart and that I had opportunities, but I felt uncomfortable with myself and overwhelmed because of my history with depression and being on the spectrum for autism. My father died when I was 11, and so it's just me, my mom, and my two siblings in Nashville. So during my senior year of high school, I really pushed myself working at TJ Maxx and Route 21, working up to almost 40 hours a week to save up for college because I knew I'd be going out of state. And I already had one sibling in college, and so I knew my mom was expecting great things for me, and I wanted to achieve those things for her. But all of my goals came with a heavy price tag. Even though I earned an academic scholarship that covered my tuition, I was still paying out of pocket for housing and other expenses. And on top of that, I was still helping out with bills at home. And my mother was still very concerned about me being far away from home, with me being on the spectrum. So as a compromise, I decided to drive back and forth between Mount Juliet, Tennessee, and Birmingham, Alabama, which is a 6-hour round trip, just to keep up with school, work, and family to make it more comfortable. By my sophomore year, my mother actually became more comfortable with me being in Birmingham for a longer term. So I actually transferred to the local TJ Maxx there and reduced my hours to 20 hours because I actually got a scholarship by maintaining a 3.8 my freshman and sophomore year. So I didn't have to work as hard as I did before. Then I stumbled across an opportunity to join a developmental psychology lab, and its focus was minority health disparities. I honestly had no idea what research was about, and my goal was simply to become a psychiatrist. But through working in his lab, I learned that it was my passion. I gained firsthand experience about how Black patients felt about the healthcare system, as well as like their perceptions of their own health and how people took it. And after that, my lab mentor decided to point me to the McNair program here at UAB, and I was accepted in the spring. My McNair program exposed me to so many things, and I had no idea what the GRE was. I didn't even know that you could get into a PhD program without having a master's degree or even right out of undergrad. I learned about how to finance college better and how to manage my money better. I even got firsthand experience on being in a conference and presenting my own research in front of so many different people. It really provided me support and gave me the tools to be more confident about my college decisions and educational choices. I was actually able to identify clinical psychology as my end goal. By junior year, everything seemed like it was coming into focus. And I was even awarded 2 additional scholarships based on my leadership and my keeping up with my GPA throughout freshman and sophomore year. And I was able to quit my job at TJ Maxx and actually focus on having a job within UAB that focused on wellness. And since I was focused on minority health disparities, it was the perfect fit for me. But then COVID-19 hit and everything kind of spiraled out of control. Honestly, when the quarantine first started, or there were talks of it, I didn't think it would impact me that much. Originally, my mind was focused on my yard show for my sorority, as well as this NIH program that I got into for the summer that I could do research for. So I was really on a roll. But the Friday before spring break, they were telling students that there was a possibility that spring break will be extended or that will completely transition to online. But it wasn't seen as a big fuss. A lot of students weren't really uncomfortable with the idea of changing because they thought that we just resumed back after spring break. But halfway through it, they told us that we weren't coming back at all and that everything was going to be online permanently for the spring. And then on top of that, I received an email from my program that told me that it was going to be canceled for the summer. And my university job even told me that they weren't sure if they were going to continue to pay us anymore due to the quarantine. I was honestly very scared. That summer program was supposed to provide me with over $5,000 that I needed for bills, school fees, and even a car this summer. Since I live downtown, I tend to walk everywhere, but now it's a little difficult due to the quarantine, so that adjustment was very difficult. And also with me being on the spectrum, it was hard adjusting to having no structure in my life. I needed a daily schedule to keep balance and to keep sane. And I found myself becoming more depressed and more lost. And even when school started, I had trouble keeping up with it because I was already drained and unmotivated from everything falling apart. However, thankfully, UAB had a lot of opportunities in place for students to get resources. Our food pantry, the Blazer Kitchen, was open on Tuesday and Wednesday for students to actually go get groceries if need be. The school even made online counseling available for students, and my student job actually allowed us to work 10 hours a week. So we were still able to get some sort of income. I found more relief, however, when my McNair director actually provided me with an opportunity to do summer research still. Everything was going to be remote, so I was able to get experience for graduate school and also still get paid during the summer, so I wasn't at much of a financial loss as before. And I actually applied for an emergency grant at our institution, which helps students who are having financial hardships due to COVID-19. I actually started to feel more financially secure because of all these opportunities that were coming into me from my institution. And after 2 weeks, I started to really feel more support and more comfortable with managing classes because of the stress was being relieved off my shoulders. And I actually was able to finish this past school session with all A's and actually 1 B. And my summer program even reached out to me saying that they pushed it to actually becoming a year-long program for seniors who are going to be graduating in the summer. So I was still able to indulge in that opportunity. Adapting to this pandemic has really allowed me to appreciate my support systems for my institution and within my family, and to utilize my platform to help continue to push more change and to feel comfortable again. I honestly want everyone listening to remember that this pandemic may be stressful and overwhelming, but there is hope. Institutions can adjust and provide students with the support that they need. This experience will allow everyone to grow and understand the importance of creating foundations that uplift students and not necessarily drain them. The journey through college is never easy, and I know that every student is resilient enough to make it through this. As Langston Hughes said, I've discovered that in life, there are ways of getting almost anywhere you want to go if you really want to go. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful talk. Now we are going to transition into our groups, and this will happen more or less automatically, I believe. You will be unmuted and you will be in your groups, and the groups will last about 25 minutes. And then we'll come back together for our report out for 3 of the groups. And we are asking each of the groups to fill out the Google form that's provided. And so hopefully this is going to happen. Terrence, are the groups going to happen now?
Yes, folks are
Okay.
joining as we speak.
Great.
Hello, hello.
Hello. So now I guess we're in our group, right?
Yes, this is the group 11.
Great, group 11. This is our special group.
Uh, Veronica, I really enjoyed your talk. I thought it was very nice.
Thank you.
Okay, just give me a second. I am going to, how y'all doing? My name is Aaron Cortez. I hope I am in the right room. I believe I am. I just want to make sure that I go to the spreadsheet that has everyone in here. So if I haven't been switched to a room, and this is the room that I'm supposed to be in, Vanessa, are you online? Yes, you're muted.
There we go. Okay. Yes, I am here.
So we're good to go, right?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so Vanessa, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Vanessa Ramirez. I'm the program coordinator at the Council for Opportunity and Education. I used to work for a talent search program back in California, and now I'm here. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Vanessa. And now that I'm set and I have everything ready, I'll introduce myself. My name is Aaron Cortez. It is a pleasure to be with you. I am currently the sitting immediate past president of the EOA region, which includes all of the Midwest, 10 states. And I also work for Northeastern Illinois University, overseeing 2 TRIO programs and a state program out of Northeastern Illinois University in Chicago. So with that said, there are about 53 people, 48 if you don't count all the COE team members that are potentially in this call as well. So we will be going over some of the conversations that have been happening and just kind of get us in the direction. So I will be moderating. I'll be, just going over the questions, supporting you to get some information, and Vanessa's gonna help us out, record some of this as well, so we could report out what is occurring in this group. Thank you again for Veronica for your words and for sharing with us. It's very impactful, the kind of things that happen in the life of our students. So let's move ahead. If there's no questions, I'm going to pause here. Are there any questions, any issues with the system? Now I know that, I can't really see everyone at once. So I don't know if someone's looking at me like, what is going on and where I am. So I just want to make sure that, I am keeping everyone moving forward. Are there any questions or issues that you might be experiencing at the moment? If not, then we can move on. So I'll wait for a second. And I'm also going to be looking at the chat box as well. Okay, I think we're good to go. I just checked something on the chat, and this is a question for Veronica. Which sorority are you in? Oh, I think I lost her. Did I lose her? I think I lost her. All right. The other question is, how do you know what group you are in? The people in this group have been placed on the regional state institution group. And there was a spreadsheet that it was shared with us. So if you were automatically moved into this group, this is where you're supposed to be, like automatically will happen. Good. Awesome. So I am going to move ahead and say, get us moving with the first question. So the first question is, in what ways has the movement towards mass virtual education that has resulted from the COVID-19 crisis provide insight into the potential to expand equity or exacerbate inequality in post-secondary education?
Could you repeat that, please?
Sure. I will go again. In what ways has the movement towards mass virtual education that has resulted from the COVID-19 crisis provided insight into the potential to expand equity or exacerbate inequality in post-secondary education?
Can you all see that now?
Questions.
I tend to think it may exacerbate inequity because those who are not I'm thinking about those who are not following or curricula or taking advantage of staying on top of their curricula while they are not in school or falling far behind or falling behind. And when and if they return to classrooms or online education, they will not
Hey love, how are you?
they will not be able to
All right, I'm on
be on top of their game,
webinar.
if you understand what I'm saying. So they will not be where they should be,
Yes.
or where they were when they
What time you going to Bible study?
where they were before the COVID crisis occurred.
Thank you. In the chat box, as you
I'm
can
thinking like
see,
4
there's a
o'clock.
question on not every district has the funds to issue equipment to the students to study virtually.
Okay.
So, you know, as we look at this question, right, it might help us also to like get those examples, like moving into a direction so we could better understand this. So I think,
you free at 4 or 3?
Sorry. Okay. So one of the questions is,
Cool. I'll call you as soon as this is over.
how we move forward. Correct. So those are the two things, right? So this rush to mass virtual education, right? Moving us very quickly into a system that might not be something that we're used to as an educational system to the extent that it is now. So that could be seen as like an exacerbation because there's a lot of the issues of access and equity, right? So please share with us a little bit more before we move to the next question.
This is Ken Red. So I agree with a lot of the points that people have been made thus far. I'm wondering, obviously, it's hard to answer this question conclusively since we're still in the, this is the beginning of a very long time period. But I'm wondering if going forward, the project will start looking at the number of of underrepresented students who are also serving as essential employees. Because for them particularly, everything that's been said is even exacerbated because not only has their education been disrupted, but they can't easily get time off from work, or they can't make as many adjustments in their work programs. And in fact, I think also, obviously, their health is more at risk because they have to go to work. So I think that might be something that we might start tracking, or maybe have you guys thought about tracking as a potential indicator and a result of COVID-19?
It's really good. Yeah, you're right on target with that. Any other additional thoughts on this question?
I think, so this is Kivon Henry from Rochester, New York. I think, as everybody said, right, we're looking at just the disruption of attainment goals, like the long haul, because I'm thinking of our students who are about to start fall 2020 and can't see what college looks like for them. They're not able to paint that picture, and so they're getting so discouraged that they want to defer their enrollment. And we don't want our students to defer enrollment because it's harder to start again, right? Once you've had that stop out period. All the distractions that happen, maybe you'll start working, right? So I'm just looking at, or I'm thinking about the students who haven't even yet started college and how they don't know if they can begin this way. And so we're trying to encourage them, and it's not how you start, it's how you finish. Don't defer, start right now. And my fear is that we're going to see a lot of folks defer. We're going to see a lot of folks take time off. And so that is going to continue to widen those education disparities that we've seen, and the progress that the TRIO communities have been able to make, because a little deferment may become never start ever again. So that's what I'm thinking of right now.
Yes, definitely. I think that continues to put us in a disadvantage, right? And the difficulties of professionals in the field also trying to, promote or encourage some type of enrollment without any notion of what that even might look like in many institutions. Yeah, so let's move to the next question. What steps should the federal government take in order to ensure that we emerge from COVID-19 crisis with a more equitable system of higher education? Thoughts on that? So I think, we could address this one a little bit by some of the push on COVID-19 packages of funding to support certain things, right? So there's no policy that's coming now to actually address some of these issues, but there is some funding that's coming in to support some of the damage or some of the impacts that COVID has been having in students, right? Or in college students, still maybe not from the federal government, but within the institutions of higher ed, how to support students getting refunds on their enrollment, right? And so kind of thinking through that, how will this look, or what will be some questions that we will have to move forward towards the federal government on how to make things better, right, for our students? I know it's a very packed question, but a little conversation behind this might help us kind of see this in a different angle. So perhaps we'll come back to this one as the conversation have. Okay, and increasing funding both on the state and federal levels. Yes, that will be very helpful. Thank you, Melissa, and help to make higher education more affordable, especially when those without jobs now or income won't be able to afford what they used to. Thank you very much, Gabriel. Yes, that's correct. So maybe that's a policy, right? Like that we're looking for. How is the federal government going to be able to allow or support so that students continue in higher ed and graduate timely? Let's go to the next question. What steps should state governments take in order to ensure that we emerge from the COVID-19 crisis? Oh, the state, sorry, I apologize. The same question, but in the state government, not the federal government. How you see yourself within your own state, if you're in public state universities, how would you see yourself getting support from the government, the state government, to be able to stay afloat or even survive or help out students, right? How do we go about that? How could we reach out? What are some ideas that you have on that area? Some specific guidelines around how many. Okay. Some specific guidelines around how money is distributed to students, but still have provisions around student-specific context. Pooja Patel, and then, okay, Eric, don't worry. Senior spend quality will be main. Is that the fact that it's that forced our state governments has targeted over 14,000 K through 12 students without internet or devices access in order to provide them with both. So your question addressing, again, access, right, in terms of technology, and focus more around the K through 12. So that's an area of need. How is the state government and the school district supporting, right, the educational department state level, supporting them to supporting youth to make sure that they're able to continue to work in their online services if we even move into the fall, right? So that's a really good approach, a really good question. What could happen there? And feel free to put it in the chat box if you feel more comfortable in that situation. And it better to like express your thought. As we wait for any other question about this, let's look at the last one, the last question here. What steps should institutions of higher ed take in order to ensure that we emerge from the COVID-19 crisis with a more equitable system of higher education? So we went through federal, state, and now we're in the institution. All of you that work at those higher institutions, what do you think that it's an approach? What do we do, right, with so many universities? I know in our university, one of our difficulties right now that we're seeing is enrollment. Are students going to want to enroll? Are they going to defer? But what do we do for that to be able not to impact us and allow students, those that are the most needed, to have those support systems?
I think TRIO people should be at the table when the decisions are made.
Yes.
Thank you, Deborah. Yes, you're right. I do believe that, TRIO programs and programs that are college access and success, right, should be at the table when these decisions are being made at the executive level at the university, right? So thank you, Deborah, for that. Anyone else? Waiting for that text box to fill in. To encourage enrollment, maybe more scholarships that cater to low-income students. Yes, that would be a great approach. Thank you, Melissa. I think state governments and institutions should foster more conversation, discussion, articulation. Oh, sorry, let me repeat this. State governments and institutions should foster more conversations, discussions on articulations, agreements to ensure that credit transfer between and across institutions. Yes, that is something that, unfortunately, like, it has never been successful enough in many areas, right? So like, are this actually occurring? So thank you, Stefan.
I actually have a comment if I'm able to.
Yes, ma'am.
So with this, I think this was an interesting question because I know a lot of students who are very big advocates on our campus and who work with administrators or who are actively trying to make the transition easier for students tend to actually be the ones who are part of underrepresented groups or part of low SES. So I think what also may be beneficial is actually communicating with those students to also get a better idea of what necessarily institutions can do to provide for the students, because those are the ones that are actively making a voice, at least the ones that I've noticed on my campus. Because when we positioned to change the pass or fail, it was the students that were involved in Gen Act or the students involved in the Black Student Union. A lot of the students of color, as well as other students who are a part of those groups, were the ones trying to push these changes to really help the students at the institution. So that might actually be a good one as well.
Yeah, for sure. Student voices is required, right? I mean, we can't just make decisions on people's behalf when we don't know what their needs might be, right? So yes, thank you so much.
And Maggie, are you with the group still? I'm noting the time, it is 2:26, so I'm wondering, should we
I'm with
prepare to wrap up at 2:30?
Yeah, let's just maybe do 5 more minutes or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So I think, one of the things as we have this last 5 minutes, and maybe, there'll be some comments coming in through the chat box. It seems like, some people are able to speak and some are not. So Maya says, investing in resources to support students, special low-income and first-gen, cultivating allies that can advocate for students' needs. So yes, I think it goes very much along with what Veronica was saying, right? But I think also, this whole impact is also allowing us to reformat the way we approach higher ed and support systems, right? I think many of us have been working on access and equity, right? But this is actually making it a lot more obvious, and it's harder now to like put a blind side to it. But it also allows us, so in that side, it allows us to have those kind of like more more direct conversations about it. But I think it also allows us to, ourselves look at our practices and edit those practices, right? I am seeing a lot of our practices change through the work that we do, right? Just because of the circumstances, a lot of spaces that we didn't know that we needed to do that kind of work, and we're addressing it. Sometimes it could be as simple as logistics, right? But that is actually getting us to be stronger, and be able to like support our students even further. So, even in that lens, as you're seeing like how the institutions, states, federal government, and how do we become more adequate about this type of issues, right? How do we see ourselves also transforming through this process, right? Because the data is letting us know something. Data that we're going to collect now is going to tell us something else, right? So some other gap. So how do we see ourselves as a transformative force? So maybe that's another area to also look at all this, right? Not only all the gaps, but how those gaps are allowing us to actually be much more successful at the work that we do. Okay. So we have the potential policy proposal for consideration, as you're seeing on your screen, and I'm pretty sure we're going to be able to share some of this information. And I don't want to read it all out. I'm going to give you a second to read it. But, there's a federal state partnership to ensuring debt-free college for all. So there is some consideration on that moving forward to it and making sure that we get this through. The support for Pell Grant restoration, that's another one that it is a potential policy proposal. Increase the reach and research of college access and success student support programs. So how does that even work? How do we make sure that we get the data that proves that this type of work works? We know that it works, and then we have some data, but how does that go even beyond? Vanessa, do you want to go a little bit further down? Thank you. The transition from competition merit-based admissions to inclusive mastery requirements. So, once again, changing that that mindset, right? And figuring out how we do this. How do we get students into that other area rather than what is currently occurring, right? Mastery-based, meaning that are the students really understanding the concepts and getting them rather than just like, these are some grades that allow them to like get in, because they prepare very well for an exam. Address systematic inequities that disproportionately limit options for low-income first-generation individuals and communities of color. So, I mean, some of those systematic inequalities tend to be what we're seeing now, right? So you don't have internet access, that's an inequality, right? And that's something that is not going to allow you to be successful no matter what. And is there even a way to address that? So the last thing is, what other policy proposals would you suggest at the institutional, state, or federal level? And you will see there the bit.ly link, and I'm sorry, I'm just like trying to see it correctly. If you have any other questions or additional things, we'll leave it in this section so you could actually read or write it in case you are not receiving this email. But let's finish up with like maybe a thought of like what else you think that might be needed, something that we have not covered through these questions of that might be of help. And I'll read your comment on the chat box.
What's your question?
All right, and Maggie, I see we're at 2:31, so I'll just take your cue when you're ready for everyone to reconvene in the main meeting room.
Yeah, I would say that now is a good time for us to reconvene.
Okay.
Thank you, Maggie.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. So now I believe that all of the other groups are going to be coming back into our group.
Yep, this will be about 1 more minute.
Okay.
We'll close, yeah.
Do this thing and I don't know if we're going or not.
Hi. Hello. So when everyone is back here, we're going to ask 3 of the groups to report out. So I'm just going to wait a second, and when I get the cue from Terrence, then we'll start that part of the session.
Woo!
Hello?
Yeah, Maggie, I've just muted everyone else as they join, but you can hear us.
Okay, okay. Did you hear what I said before or not? No, okay. So everyone who is in a group should now be coming back into the main group again. So Terrence, is that the case that people are back?
Yep.
Okay.
They're
okay.
fully joining back in, yeah.
Okay. So now we're going to transition to having our report outs. And so let me just, for report out, Kyle Ethelbach, would you report out? Kyle?
Okay. Yes, I'm here. I'm here.
Okay.
I was
Great.
fighting with the mute button. So, good afternoon, everyone. I had the pleasure of working with group number 1. One thing we realized is time went by very quickly. And so we were in the middle of a conversation, and I think we were on our way to solving the world's problems, but I'll give you what we have so far. The primary thing I think that emerged was, obviously, we didn't know what was happening, and we were basically caught in a situation where we weren't prepared. And so the original response in a lot of cases didn't necessarily take into account the actual needs of the individuals that we were trying to serve. So were the individuals, was our response really in line with the needs of the individuals who we were trying to help? Also, what is our responsibility as individuals who come from an institution and administrations in this whole crisis, and how should we be held accountable? So what are the accountability measures on our end, and whose role should that be in terms of the federal government, knowing what the needs of the students are, as well as now what types of accountability measures are necessary to make sure that we're meeting those needs. I think the same would apply for state and institutions of higher education, and just finding out what's going on in the community prior to really mobilizing a formal response. And that is pretty much as far as we got. And then we were directed back into the community as a whole. So that is what we have, and I'll be putting that into the online Google form as well.
Thank you very much. Now let's go to the next group. Kristen, are you available? right now?
I think so.
Okay, great. Great. I can see you. Thank you.
So our group had was using the particular lens of the rural institutions and rural students. And probably no surprise to anyone, the issues of access to technology and broadband are huge, not only for rural students, for a lot of our urban universities and even the suburban campuses too, but in those rural areas, it's a significant concern. So continuity of learning and education for those students has significantly been affected with the transition to online. The other things that are affecting the learning right now are a reflection of the increasing unemployment. So phones are being turned off, so it's difficult to get a hold of students through those channels. There's a lot of moving from one place to another. Evictions are going up, so folks are no longer at the same address. And then general loss of benefits through unemployment. So loss of insurance or healthcare access, those kinds of things. For students, challenges of navigating work and online life are significant as well. And I think especially for students with dependents, as those challenges were noted in the indicators report this year, that's something that's definitely exacerbated by the pandemic. And then institutional uncertainties about what's happening in the fall have a particularly difficult effect on marginalized students and families. To not know what's happening, to not know until August whether or not those classes will be resuming or how they'll be resuming. Then we moved on to some of the policy recommendations, and three that emerged from the list of what the Pell Institute has put together. One is the debt-free policy recommendation that resonated with the group. The adjustment to admissions requirements or standards was another one that came up. And then also the restoration of the Pell purchasing power was the other one that came up. And then finally, Tom Mortensen, who was one of our group members, just reiterated that the outcomes for higher education now, more than ever, they're going to be even more important. Higher education, the value of higher education is going to be even more significant in this context than it has been in the past. So to keep pushing on the idea of higher education as a public good as well as a personal good, and just promoting how effective that is at increasing economic mobility, social mobility, all of those things that we want to see happen for students and families.
Thank you very much, Kristen. That was a really good summary. Now let's go to Asosa. Asosa, are you there? Unmute yourself. Asosa? Okay,
Yes.
good, great.
So our group had a really robust discussion. We initially began speaking a bit about how COVID-19 kind of has exacerbated the issues that we see faced by populations such as low-income first-generation students. And we spoke about how that was already mentioned about the connectivity issues faced at home, having adequate study space, and really just having an adequate study environment at home. We see a lot of students that are struggling a lot because they're not used to the environment at home versus the environment at school. We also talked a little bit about how this has also exacerbated healthcare inequalities, because some students that are typically used to living on campus no longer have that access that they may have been relying on at university health centers and what have you. And then we also spoke a bit about how this pandemic has also kind of expanded access a bit and leveling the playing field now that students who may have typically been in that top 10% of for high school students for AP testing, they would have performed well on these tests. Now we're seeing that everyone is going through the same kind of crisis with, grappling with the technology issues, and, students who may not have had the same opportunities to perform well on these tests or had access to the same types of resources. We're seeing that kind of level out a bit. We also spoke about how it has expanded in terms of capacity, where you would have typically been able to teach a classroom with maybe 25. Now, if you have the bandwidth with Zoom and Skype and those types of technologies, you can reach a much broader range of students. And then adversely, that has also kind of led to a bit of overload of resources for students. So that can be a little bit difficult navigating, because now everything is it's all online, and there's a lot coming at you. We also spoke a bit about, I guess, the role of the federal government in expanding. We spoke about that in the indicators report. We need more funding, more Pell funding. And I think that we see that a lot for low income and first generation students who are really relying on that funding. And, it hasn't been leveled out with the cost of education. And we also spoke a bit about, our group was specifically individuals who are involved in education opportunity fund programs that are state run. So we had a pretty good discussion about the state's role in expanding access to higher education for low income students, and how that can kind of continue to close that gap. We also spoke a bit about how the increase in Pell Grants can kind of serve as a way to bridge that gap between students who would typically be going to community colleges versus more competitive colleges, which was another one of the things that was highlighted in the indicators report, because now we're seeing students who may have typically gone to more community colleges and in-state colleges may have access to, attend more competitive colleges, but that's something that definitely needs more state and federal attention as well. And we also spoke a bit about the role of the higher education institutions themselves being playing a really big role in waging that gap in terms of attainment for higher education, specifically with the CARES Act funding needing more transparency. Specifically, as me as a graduating college student, there's some students know where that money has going and how it has affected them, but for others there really hasn't been any type of notice on where that funding is going and how it's being utilized by the school. So we had a really, really great discussion. I think overall, we really highlighted on the need, I think, for the need for really everyone to kind of have this realization, and we can't, put a blanket on what COVID-19 has shown us. We've seen these inequalities firsthand, and if anything, COVID-19 has done the job of showing us that these inequalities exist. And I think that people who typically might not have an understanding, and it might be a convenience for them not to know what some students may face, now they're having that understanding that these are problems and these are inequalities that exist. So I think that was one of the main highlights of our discussion.
Thank you so much. These are really good summaries, and we are recording these, so we will be able to make them available. So thank you very much. The next part, we're just about on time, but I want to keep us moving. I'm going to ask Wendy from the Lumina Foundation to share some reflections, and then, actually, I'm going to ask Jamie first to share some reflections. Jamie Rorson from the Gates Foundation to share some reflections, and then Wendy will share some reflections from her perspective. So are you guys online and ready? Jamie, are you ready to go first?
Yes, sorry, I was having a little bit of unmuting problem. Hi everybody, Jamie Rorson from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Thank you all so much for making the time to come to this event. It's great to have such a good turnout. And thank you, Maggie and Laura, and to all of your teams for the work on the report, obviously, but also for putting together such a great event. I think all of us here probably have had a lot of Zoom, WebEx, MS Teams meetings over the past several months. And honestly, this event has been really energizing. And I think that just says a lot for myself, at least, who I feel like I've been going through a bit of fatigue with all of these virtual meetings. But we are in unprecedented times here. And I was saying this a little bit in my breakout group, but I mean, again, to the theme of the event today, I think I'm trying to look at this in terms of opportunities. We are in a really unfortunate scenario right now, particularly our students and our institutions. But I think it's really important to still think about data and think about the role of data. I think maybe now more than ever, we continue to see higher quality data emerge every year, better disaggregates, greater sources, more sources and such. And I think, in this COVID context, obviously data collection and analysis takes time, and we'll learn lessons from what's happening in the field in the coming months and the coming years, I'm sure. But the fact is that because of the work of the Pell Institute and Penn Ahead and others, where we're really shining a clear and consistent light on inequity in post-secondary education, we're able to engage in some of these conversations where COVID has really shifted our perception of what it even means to serve students or to serve our institutions, or what the institutions do to serve our students. And because we have this baseline understanding of equity concerns and equity data, I think that is really going to continue to help to make these conversations more robust, and will prepare people to come to these conversations in this new context, or this sort of revised context, with a strong understanding that while we are seeing greater inequities now, inequity is not a new concept to post-secondary education. So for those of you who work with students directly, work at post-secondary institutions, it's been really good to hear from you today, the students especially, just to put words and to paint a portrait of what these uncertain times look like in practice and what they look like operationally has been really great. And again, quantitative data mean a lot, and I think that the report bears that out, but also just listening to people and listening to the stories of students and of administrators, of faculty, of all of the stakeholders who make post-secondary education an enterprise. Really important to understand and learn from their stories. I think, I work with grantees who look at the economy, and we don't know exactly when and how the economy will recover from this, but I think what we do know, or what we can reasonably assume, is that students with post-secondary education are going to fare better in the economy as it rebounds than students without. So really important to continue to try to support our students from basic needs security through instruction to the extent that we can, but also to think about how we're doing that equitably. Because I think, I think this could be a turning point. I think it's going to require a lot of innovation, and it's going to require a lot of grassroots work, maybe not relying so much on our government structures to make this happen. But I do think this can be a time that we can emerge from in a way that shifts the script on equity. And I am sure I'm over time, but I want to thank you again for coming to this event and for supporting the work, and hope to be in touch.
So thank you very much, Jamie. Now I'm going to turn it over to Wendy. Wendy, I can see that you're there. If you want to unmute yourself to give a few remarks.
Perfect. Yes, it worked. Thank you. And thank you, Jamie, for those remarks. My colleague, Catherine, and I wanted to express our thanks to Maggie and to Laura, and especially to Veronica for sharing her story today and her message of hope, as well as to all of you who made today's event possible. So I think, we've heard today, as we have heard for many years, how critical a post-secondary education is for the economic and social well-being of individuals and our society overall. And we know that in light of COVID-19, that going back to normal is no longer a possibility. I think people hear that over and over again in these meetings, that is the only thing that we can be truly sure of. We know that fall enrollments are likely to be down by at least 15%, if not more. We heard in this conversation today, as in a number of conversations leading up to today, that states and institutions, students and families are all suffering tremendous financial losses. And we know that the veil has been pulled back and that the inequities that have long endured for students of color, students from low-income households, and students who are the first in their colleges to attend college are front and center. As Jamie mentioned, this is nothing new, but it's an important time to really reflect on what has always been true and is further exacerbated in these times. And then finally, I would say we know that things need to change, and with change comes tremendous opportunity. So kind of similar to Veronica, who started us off with this idea of hope, right? And I don't want to lose that. And my hope is that we will change. We will change as a country, and that this is a critical moment to be able to use all of this strong data that's being produced here and elsewhere, and couple that with the stories, right? These related stories of learners and of students as an opportunity to tackle key policies and practices that we've talked about today, such as debt-free college for all, Pell Grant restoration, expansion of the TRIO program, and a host of other policies and practices that can take place, within institutions and at campuses. And my hope is that in doing so, that we can all work to ensure more equitable, just, and resilient communities, and a more equitable higher education system that supports all learners in their educational journeys. So thank you to all of you for making that possible.
Wow, thank you. Thank you to both Jamie and to Wendy. I really like the fact that you are ending with hope. And I think that's what we need to move forward. And I can just echo what they have just said, that we can work together to ensure that all students and young students and adult students have the opportunity to fulfill their full potential and support their families. And we need everybody's talent to address the issues that we have. But so thank you all for participating. We will be compiling the Google Docs and be sending them out to you. And we really appreciate your participation, your interests. And we are right on time, which is great. So thank you so much, and we'll be in touch. Thank you for participating. So long.